Hi guys, welcome back or welcome to Switch to Life. And in today's video, to celebrate its 40th anniversary, we're going to be talking about Disney's darkest movie, at least from their animation division, that of course being The Black Cauldron, which is honestly a pretty forgettable film if you ask me. I thought that the animation was pretty beautiful, and while I did like a couple of the characters, most of them just don't have that charm that Disney has with memorable, iconic characters. And honestly, it kind of makes sense why this movie flopped at the box office. Again, the animation is really good, the world building is really cool, but unfortunately, that's pretty much all this film has going for it. The humor is kind of non-existent with the exception of one character we'll dive into later, and of course there's also the music, which isn't really that great, especially considering this is a Disney movie. I get it, they didn't really want the characters bursting into song every 15 minutes, but still. I will admit that I did like the voice acting for all of the characters, especially with their British accents, but unfortunately, that's pretty much the only thing good about these characters. Their designs are nice, but they don't feel like characters. They're just there. They're there to help the story move forward, and that's really bad because the characters are extremely forgettable, with the exception of two. There's, of course, the main villain, the Horn King, who, I'm gonna be honest, the Horn King doesn't really do a lot in this movie. Sure, he's absolutely scary and terrifying, but his main plan is to just use the Black Cauldron, which is the name of this movie, to summon an army of the dead to take over the world. And eventually he gets there, we'll talk more about that, but I didn't really like him compared to a lot of other iconic Disney villains, which is really disappointing. He just didn't have that thing that would be relatable, that would make him a good villain, which is very sad. Sure, he's great as an antagonist, but unfortunately, he's not that great as a character. The only other character who stands out is Gurgi, and he's kind of like the Gollum of this movie. He's just super funny. I absolutely love his voice, and I love the way that he's portrayed as like this selfish character who's only wanting munchies and crunchies, but eventually, due to the friends he makes along the journey, he eventually becomes a hero to his friends, which I absolutely loved. But sadly, he's literally the only character in this movie to get any character development. That might be an exaggeration, but we'll dive more into that later. As for the story, well, honestly, the story is extremely forgettable. That could just be me. I've heard a lot of praise for the story of this movie, but I didn't like this movie. It wasn't funny because, with the exception of Gurgi, none of the jokes actually landed. There's also the fact that the villain isn't really that much of a character, even though he's very clearly a big threat. Even going so far as to torture his number one assistant, Creature. But like I said, with the exception of Gurgi, I don't think this movie even deserves to exist, which is very disappointing. But with that in mind, it's time to actually dive into the story. First, we're introduced to Taran, who is our main character, and he's just this young boy who's supposed to be a pig keeper watching over this old man Dalbin's pig. Well, it turns out that Henwin, the pig, is actually extremely special because she has oracle powers. Essentially, she can see into the future, and right now, the Horned King, who is trying to build up an empire to conquer the entire world, is trying to find the pig so that he can use her powers to find the Black Cauldron, which he can then use to summon an army of the dead, which he can then use to take over the world. Well, Henwin actually sees this in a vision, and now Taran and Henwin are on the run, but they get separated when a small furry creature named Gurgi shows up, and he's looking to rob Taran of his munchies and crunchies, but yeah, he's just a selfish jerk who only wants a friend. But unfortunately, because of the separation, Henwin gets captured, Taran sneaks into the castle, only to get captured in the process, at which point he's forced to use Henwin so that she can reveal the location of the Black Cauldron. Well, Taran actually manages to see the location in the water bowl, But thanks to the Horn King startling him, he accidentally spills the water bowl and nobody else gets to see the location of the Black Cauldron. So he runs away with Henwin and tosses her onto a river, but unfortunately he doesn't make it himself. So Taran is captured by the Horned King and his soldiers and locked in the dungeon, where he is rescued by this heroine named Princess Alonwi, who was captured because she has a glowing magical orb that can point the way to anything, and the Horn King captured her because he thought he could use that to find the Black Cauldron, but guess not. On their way to escaping through the dungeon walls, they end up encountering a tortured prisoner named Fluter Flam, who was actually a bard with a simple lyre that just so happens to be cursed to snap a string every time he lies.
I have sung in some of the finest courts. Well, I'm only waiting for an invitation. Oh, shush.
Well, I don't know why he was captured, aside from maybe being annoying, because I can tell they were trying to make him the comic relief of this movie, but it just didn't really work out. Anyway, they're exploring the dungeon, and Taran finds a magical sword thanks to the old king's corpse called Dernwin, which is magical enough to attack the Horned King's soldiers and maybe even powerful enough to kill the Horned King himself. But, you know, being a simple pig keeper and not really knowing how to properly wield a sword, they just decide to use the sword to run away, and they succeed. At which point, Creeper tries to apologize to his master, even going so far as to try to kill himself. But then the Horn King says that it's actually good they escaped, because Taran knows where the Black Cauldron is, so they could simply just follow the boy to where the Black Cauldron is kept. Thus begins a quest to find the Black Cauldron, which I find to be pretty stupid. Why is it that the heroes always try to find the things that the villain is seeking out, only to lead them right to it? It's a problem with a lot of movies and series, actually, but it's a major problem with this one because the Horn King has no idea where to even start looking for the Black Cauldron. And then they reunite with Gurgi, who at first Taran doesn't really like, but Gurgi tries to win over their hearts, especially the heart of the princess, and eventually they work together to find the Black Cauldron, even if Gurgi is only in it for munchies and crunchies. Then a lot of random stuff happens, like they find a fairy place where they reunite with Henwin, at which point the fairies decide to return Henwin to Dolben, the old man at the start of the movie, and then they send the gang off to a witch's cottage where they meet the witches of Morva, 3 powerful witches who, while it's not really confirmed, I believe that they created the Black Cauldron along with a few other magical items, but for the most part, they simply turn humans into frogs, especially if they're really cute humans like Fluter Flam, apparently. But when Taran uses the sword of Dernwin to protect themselves, the witches decide to strike up a bargain. They give up the sword, and they will trade the Black Cauldron. Now, what I do love here is that there is a tiny bit of character development here. His whole life, Taran has wanted to be a great and mighty warrior, and now thanks to this magical sword, he finally has a chance. But he gives it up, because throughout this journey, he's realized he's not warrior material. He's just a simple pig keeper, and he's pretty happy with his life as it is, which I think is nice, but not really much for character development. And so they give up the sword, and they get the Black Cauldron, only for the witches to say that the only way to destroy the Black Cauldron is for someone to climb into the cauldron of their own free will.
Cookie is bold and brave. He will climb into the evil cauldron.
However, the poor duckling will never climb out alive.
Yikes!
So they basically just traded a magical sword for an evil relic that they can't even use, at which point Gurgi discovers that there's danger and runs away, only for the rest of the gang to be captured by the Horned King and his army. and the Horn King uses the Black Cauldron to summon an army of the dead and gets ready to conquer the entire world. So this is one of those movies where it looks like the villain is actually gonna win. But luckily, Gurgi, who finally managed to make some friends, decides to go back and rescue his friends. And when he does, Taran is trying to climb into the Black Cauldron so that he can sacrifice himself to destroy the cauldron and its powers. But luckily, Gurgi has a moment of clarity, and he says Master should not go into the cauldron because Master has a lot of great friends and even family. Gurgi has absolutely no one. So Gurgi jumps into the plot. And I love it because at the beginning of the movie, Gurgi is the selfish, lonely creature who only wants to have a friend and definitely munchies and crunchies. But eventually he used his friendship to perform a heroic sacrifice that eventually thwarted the Horned King and the army of the dead. But then the movie gets a little weird because then a vortex opens up that basically summons the army of the dead back, but at the same time, a lot of living people are being sucked in as well. Among them is Taran and the Horned King, who are having a bit of a fight with each other, and eventually the Horned King ends up throwing Taran close enough to the cauldron so that Taran can be sucked in, but then for some strange reason, Taran isn't sucked in. Instead, the Horn King is sucked in, even though he's further away, which I found to be pretty weird. Maybe it was just because Taran was lying on the ground. I don't know. And at first, it looks like Creeper is upset because the Horn King is dead, but then he realizes his torturer is dead, so he's actually free. And then it's revealed that even though Gurgi made a selfless sacrifice, the Black Cauldron was not destroyed, just its dark powers. And so the Witches of Morva show up to collect the Black Cauldron, as that was actually part of their deal. But then Fluter Flam says that they need to strike a bargain, because they pretty much got screwed in the original deal, and they deserve fair repayment. So the Witches of Morva offer up Dernwyn, the magical sword from earlier, but Taran says that all he really wants is his good friend Gurgi. And I love that because when we first meet Gurgi, he's this selfish character. And because of that, Taran didn't really like Gurgi at all throughout most of the movie. But I guess during the second half, and especially after his heroic sacrifice, he realized Gurgi really was his friend and was willing to do anything to protect his master, which I found to be really good. So Taran says that he wants Gurgi to come back, and, well, the witches decide to follow through and give up Gurgi's dead body. Now, at first, it looks like they just gave back the body, but then it's revealed that he's actually still alive and still looking for munchies and crunchies, but now he has a few friends to hang out with. And so our heroes go off on their own journey as they return home, and maybe even looking forward to a few new adventures, which I hear that this movie is actually based off of 2 books from a 5-book series. So maybe they were setting up a sequel, but, you know, low box office stuff happens. And with all of that in mind, that is the end of the movie. Honestly, I found it to be pretty lackluster. Like I said, the story is relatively boring. And like I said, with the exception of Gurgi, who gets a lot of character development and helps Taran get some character development, none of the other characters are actually memorable in this movie. Even the main villain is, while he is definitely a big threat, it doesn't really have that character that makes him feel like a legit character, just a force of nature, if you ask me, which is disappointing. I also extremely hated the transitions, you know, when the scenes will fade to black and then you wait 5 seconds for the next scene to play, which is very stupid. And while I will admit the animation is beautiful and pretty fluid, especially considering that this is the first ever movie to use computer-generated animation, just the fact that this is Disney's darkest movie means that the music isn't that great, the characters aren't really that memorable, the humor is pretty much non-existent with the exception of Gurgi, and Fluter Flam, I guess, if you like him. And also, the witches of Morva were just really disturbing, especially the one who keeps liking Fluter Flam. But since then, this movie has gained a cult following. I myself am not part of it because I do not like this movie, but what do you guys think? Be sure to leave your thoughts down below in the comment section, and if you enjoyed this video, feel free to support my channel by joining my membership program, or you can just do the free option and subscribe. But with all of that in mind, make sure that you guys are staying safe out there, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye-bye.
You're charming. And pungent, too.